Hey guys, it's Dan with the 1042 Project, and we got Keith Hanks here with us today, and we got my wife Christina, the co-founder, and Jane is here. And today we're just going to sit down and talk with Keith. He's got quite the story, and he's what I consider a trailblazer in this kind of work that we're doing. He's kind of helped giving me the courage to get into this type of field to helping first responders. Just guys like him and Michael Segru and Ron Rufo and some of the other guys that have just come before us, and they're kind of the trailblazers. So we're just going to kind of sit down with him and hear a little bit of his story and ask him some questions and talk a little bit about some of the rawness and some of the stuff that people are afraid to talk about around the break table. We're just going to go ahead and talk about it right now, if you don't mind. So Keith, you want to tell us just a little bit about you and what you're doing now and a little bit of your past?
Sure, yeah. So I was a firefighter and EMT in Massachusetts for 21 years, from 1996 to 2017. And I actually left the job due to PTSD. A lot of that was due to lack of resources, lack of support, and getting through it. And I kind of just got to my breaking point, and it was better for me to leave the job than to try to continue to push through it. So I left both jobs because I worked both municipal fire and private EMS. I left both jobs in fall of 2017. And when I did, I had already been diagnosed with PTSD in 2015. And almost immediately I started, advocating for this, realizing that a lot of the reason why I got to the point where I did with my PTSD was because I didn't have the support. No one was talking about it. It was so unspoken of in the first responder world. And so when I left the job, I amped it up a little bit and I started doing more. And one of those things was taking what was journaling and memoirs and turning into more like chapter work and writing a book. And over the years it took off, and I went from having 100 pages to now trying to edit 600. And it's you go through life and you do this job for over 2 decades, and you don't realize not just professional stuff, but the personal stuff the baggage that you build up. And so that kind of became its own thing. And next thing I know, I'm kind of speaking in front of people. I'm doing more on social media, and I started doing like public speaking, and which was not really anything new. And for me, I'm not someone who gets nervous in front of people talking, because I was a training officer for most of my career, and so I actually enjoy speaking in front of people. So it became very natural for me to be a voice, and that kind of took off into connecting with people. And one of those connections was with a woman who owns a coaching business by the name of First Responder Coaching. And it just everything that I do now is kind of come to find out who I really am.
Right.
And it wasn't the job. And I always thought the job was me. It was Firefighter Hanks, EMT Hanks, daddy, husband, whatever. And I'm so much more to that, and I know that now. And all of this has kind of become who I am.
That's great. And I felt like that too. I know when I went out I spent 14 years when I went out on medical, and I actually went on medical for heart, and then they found out during all the procedures that it was actually caused by the PTSD. It wasn't actually heart related. And it sounds like that's pretty common. And it seems like the more I travel around the country and we meet with people like you, so many of our stories are similar, eerily similar. But I think that's, in a way, it's kind of a good thing, because it lets us know that what we're feeling is normal, because what we see every day, it's not normal. Nobody's meant to do that. We're not equipped for it. And if we just take a step back, because now I see the man you are here today, and I look up to you, that, and I see the stuff you're doing and the impact you're making for first responders. But I also know that you didn't start from this point. You got to this point. And I know from building our organization, it can be scary, it can be lonely at times, and there's a lot of times you may want to quit. And you do have to stay focused on the why you're doing it, and that's what we talk about all the time. And it's for like the people at home that are listening, people like you and I who would get off our shift, and we were so focused on planning our suicide we couldn't enjoy our own family.
That's right.
To go back when you first started your career, because I know I started when I was 20. I started young, and you did too, I believe. How old were you when you started?
2 days after my 18th birthday. Still in high school.
Right. So we're still very young, right? Our brains are still being developed, and here we are being thrown into this trauma world, and we're expected to know it and to be able to handle it. So let me ask you this: going back, you obviously, I would assume, you probably didn't feel equipped going into the job, did you? Did you know going into the job the mental health struggles you're going to have and how to handle those?
No, I knew I was going to see bad things. There was no doubt in my mind from my family doing it that I was going to see bad stuff, and I was prepared for that. I wasn't prepared for the mental part of it, the ongoing trauma, and the effects it was going to have on my life and my family. and we just didn't talk about it then.
When you first started, was like when you went through the academy or through the training and stuff like that, was there anything related to how to respond to the trauma and how to heal from that at all?
Not at all. Not at all. Not one little bit. And my actual first critical incident stress debriefing after one of my more major calls in the first 4 months of being on the job was handled in a way that was no one really wanted to speak, because the guy got in the front of the room, was like, does anyone want to share their feelings or anything that happened? And of course the room full of men, and everyone's like, nope. And he looked at everyone's like, well, coffee and donuts in the back, guys. And that was the extent of that first interaction. So it sets a precedent, right? It says, as a man in a very testosterone-filled career at that time, it set a precedent that you don't talk about it. If the senior guy's not going to talk about it, the new guy won't talk about it. And so that kind of paved the way.
Did you ever try to talk to anybody about it? I never really did.
No, we have what's called tailboard therapy in the fire service, and you sit in the back of the truck and you make fun of the call you just went on, like, oh, that guy was sitting there and his leg was over here, or maybe whatever it was. You make jokes of it with our dark humor, and that's how we cope with it. And that's what we did. We smoked butts, we drank beer, and that's what we did.
And that's how it was for me too. I mean, it seemed like a lot of times the shift would end by, hey guys, you want to go grab a beer?
Yep.
And then you go to beer, and you would actually think that you were decompressing or you were letting a load off at the time, but you really weren't, because the stuff we were talking about, number one, it was usually cynical. It was
always cynical.
Yeah, let's be real. It was
always cynical.
It was never true help, and there was never true camaraderie that we were talking about. We weren't helping each other.
No, because we were all afraid to really open up. We really were. We didn't want to be the one to open up. We wanted someone to open up, but we didn't want to be the person to open up. We were always hoping someone else would.
Now, you mentioned your family was also firefighters.
Yep.
Did you ever see any of them ever speak about, in any way, about what they saw? Or
They would speak, they would talk about the calls they went on, but it was never like, well, I can't believe I just saw this, or wow, this is really weighing heavy. It was never like that. They handled it by drinking and smoking, and other things that were unhealthy. And that's how I grew up. And so that was already, before I even got on the job, for me, that was that lifestyle. It was like, okay, so my family's been doing this for 100 and something years by this point. We don't talk about it. And so I already knew we don't talk about it. And it's generational, In the first responder world, there's a lot of traditions. And one of those is doing the job generation after generation. And you learn from your predecessors.
when you found yourself in that debriefing after a crisis situation and you were sitting there thinking, okay, if the senior person is not going to stand up and speak, I'm not going to. What stigma do you think was in that room that was keeping people from actually speaking up?
Men don't have emotions. There wasn't one female there. There was the dispatcher who handled the call, who was a male. All the cops that were on scene were men. The EMTs that were there were men. And all the firefighters that were there were men. And not that, women are the only ones with emotions, because men have emotions and it's okay for us to feel. And I know that now. But at a very impressionable 18 years old, not even out of high school, the last thing you want to do is be something that no one else is. And that was really the stigma. It was men don't cry, men don't have emotions, men don't let things bother them, especially firemen.
So how did you cope with it when you were going through? I know when I was a young officer, and I remember the first call I went to and realized my life was going to change. It was a vehicle accident involving a young person. I realized my life wasn't going to change, and I actually remember getting off that shift and leaving work and driving to get my first six-pack because I knew I needed to numb whatever just happened. And so I remember doing that, and that would repeat itself call after call, day after day after day. That's how I would numb it, was through alcohol. And later on, when I was out of law enforcement, I got addicted to pain pills, another way of just trying to cope with unprocessed calls. And I know a lot about what our organization is we want to talk about is how to process a call, because we always talk about processing and what processing looks like. And if we can just process a call, maybe we won't have to deal with all these struggles down the road. When you were a young officer, and I know this is a big question, but when were you realizing that you were starting to process? When did you start to realize you were changing, and that you were becoming a person that you weren't, and kind of walk us through what?
So I think when I first started realizing that I wasn't handling what I was seeing correctly was when I met my first wife, Heather, because she was not at all affiliated with the first responder world or military. There was no one in her immediate family that was either. And so this was a whole new world, and she was seeing someone that, you know, I know now that she probably knew a lot more about me than I ever told her. But she was picking up on things that weren't normal. And it was through her conversations, our conversations, the things she was saying, that I was kind of becoming cognizant of this. Well, I am different than everyone else. And no wonder when I go to family get-togethers, everyone kind of looks at me when I start talking and telling stories, you know. Yep. And so I was probably around 20. So I was a couple years in by this point. But it was honestly, it was my first wife. It was having that outside perspective of, holy crap, you know, most people aren't like this, and it's like, oh, maybe this is affecting me, you know. But I didn't know, because we didn't know about in 1999. We didn't know what PTSD really was. We didn't really hear about it. It wasn't until, you know, the wars after 9/11 that we started hearing about it with the military.
Yep.
You know, so it was I had no idea what it was.
So with your conditioning, basically, of, you know, men don't have emotions, and, you know, generationally, the men in your family didn't talk about what they saw and experienced or how to process that, what were some of the things that you did, if there were any, ways that you were reaching out for help or screaming for help without necessarily saying those words? Because from your experience, it probably wouldn't have been accepted, but what did that look like?
You know, looking back, I think, because when you repress emotions, you forget how to use emotions. And it isn't always like riding a bike. And I think one of the biggest things that I would often do is have a lot of emotional outbursts, because I was, you know, emotionally dysfunctioning. And because I had just been taught and conditioned and brainwashed, if you will, to shut them off, to you know, when you get into the first one world, that they teach you to turn those dials down, and it's supposed to be a temporary thing. I don't think they want to make monsters in the world, but they kind of do, because they don't teach you how to turn them back up when you punch out for the day, or you go home, or you leave the station. And so I think my initial crying for help was probably almost literally crying for help. It wasn't necessarily saying I need help, but it was like these emotional, confused outbursts that no one knew what to do, and it just came across as Keith being either angry or violent or whatever it may be. And I think that's a pretty common thing for a lot of men, is that we just become so emotionally dysfunctional, we don't know how to express ourselves because of this.
So what advice do you have for first responders who recognize that you know, they're short-tempered, they're having trouble sleeping, they're not the way they were before, but they're not sure what to do next? What advice would you have for them?
I always thought, because I was having angry outbursts, that I was an angry person. And deep down, I knew I wasn't. I knew I didn't want to be angry. And so when I talk to people about this, one of the like I said, one of the biggest things people always say is, I'm always pissed off. I always get angry. I fly off the handle. I yell at my kids. I get in fights with my wife, whatever it may be. I'm getting in fights with, you know, the staff at the station, whatever it may be. But that's not who I am. And I always tell people, what's going on, the traumas that you've experienced aren't necessarily defining you. The outward personality that a lot of us portray because of what we see, not just from the job, but from personal experience, childhood stuff, family stuff, you know, traumatic events in our life, it creates this personality because, you know, trauma is so, we want to avoid trauma, so we want to avoid what caused trauma. So we develop this personality that isn't us. And we remove ourselves from who we really are. And so I always try to tell people that just because you have anger issues, you are not necessarily an angry person, and that it's okay to try to face these things, because the only way you're going to get beyond them and you're going to be able to be who you really are is to find out who you really are and to work past that anger, because you aren't necessarily an angry person. Most people are not angry people. We have anger as a secondary emotion, and we all experience it. Just to have it 24/7 doesn't mean that's who you are.
Did anybody ever reach out to you and say, I'm seeing this, or I'm noticing this, and at all try to reach out or help in any way?
You know, there was some family members, especially, you know, after my first wife died, there was some family members who tried, but it was done in a very unhelpful way. it was done in a look what you're doing to the family way, look what you're doing to your kids sort of way. And when you have PTSD, you are a burden in your mind. You are a burden to those around. You are a burden to your family, your wife, your kids, your whatever it is, your job. And when someone approaches you in a way that's almost narcissistic in nature, and is trying to make it like, well, you need to get help because you're affecting everyone else, not because they're genuinely concerned about you. That's not helpful. And PTSD is a terrible thing, in which it takes every situation, even if it is a form of help, and if there's any negativity with it, it turns it on you. And that's exactly what it did with me. Is it turned me on, and it's like, see, you are a burden. You should feel shame. You should feel guilt. And these people are just ashamed of who you are. And that's what it did, and it caused me to spiral more and more. The more and more these particular people would push that. So it's all about being genuine when you want to help someone, you know. And it can't be about you. It needs to be about really wanting to help that person.
I think that's a really good point to share, that a lot of the times what the outward behaviors that people see because of the mental health struggles, they're difficult things, right? So
Yeah.
sometimes the outside people just look at it and think, you know, that they shouldn't do that, or that's not okay, but they're failing to look at the first responder and recognize what they experienced
Right.
that brought them to that place.
What you're feeling as a bystander or an onlooker, take that and magnify it times 10 for the person who's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
For me, I know guilt and shame is what held me back from a lot of stuff. The guilt and shame I held about myself. I'm so hard on myself. I mean, the stuff I say to myself, I would never let anybody else get away with saying.
Oh, right.
You know, my brain just is what it does. And the guilt and shame was one thing I fought with for years. And how did you, and maybe you still struggle with it, because I know sometimes I still have times where I look back at my past and I kind of have a little bit of guilt and shame, but I'm learning to let that go. What are some tools you've used to help you get that? I mean, for me, it's just been talking to people like you who understand me and find out that how I'm feeling and some of my reactions and my behaviors are similar to the ones that maybe you are having, and to just let me know that it's not, that I guess I'm not just broken and I'm not lost. So for me, that's how the guilt and shame has slowly gone away, is by hearing from other people like you. And what's helped you with that? And do you still battle with guilt and shame of your past?
Oh, I still battle guilt and shame. A lot of my past, that guilt and shame I've worked through quite a bit. But I think it's almost like a predisposed medical condition. Now that I've been through so much trauma, I'm always gonna kind of lean back on that guilt and shame thing with certain situations as time goes on. And the biggest thing that I've done these days with the healing I've done and everything that I use, the tools in my toolbox, is I always reflect on the fact that, yeah, you know, all this stuff sucked. All this really was not fun to go through. It was horrible and it almost killed me. But you know something? I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't gone through it. And I had to feel and I had to experience what I had in order to find who I really am as a man. And it all sucked. It doesn't get rid of that. But the guilt and shame, I've realized that it was a perspective thing for me. And that's come from, it's almost like when alcoholics, they do their the 12 steps, and one of them is to make amends with your past and all that, and they may write letters to people they've hurt or whatever it is. It's similar to that, where you start realizing through reconnecting with people that you shut out of your life that you actually never really hurt them. And you actually don't necessarily have a reason to have guilt and shame. It's all self-perpetuating, and you created that yourself because of this terrible injury, disorder, whatever you want to call it, called PTS. And that's really where it lies, and that's what I focus on every day, is that it was my perspective because of my trauma brain. And I hold on to that every day, and you have to stay healthy.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that coaching was kind of like the beginning of your healing journey, I guess. Would you phrase it that way?
Middle of the road.
Yeah.
I had done a lot of work already with trauma therapy, and I had already kind of gotten into mindfulness and meditation, which was really when I really started realizing what I needed to do. Coaching really, it gave me that perspective that I needed, that I was completely in control of what I needed to do to permanently change my life and keep it that way. And the coaching, because of it puts the control back in you. Like you think, a lot of people think with therapy, it's like, well, yeah, they're kind of coaching. Well, they are, but therapists and counselors really have the answer. And when you come to them depressed, it's okay, you're depressed, so we're going to try this way. You're either going to go to A or B when you're depressed. And so they're going to guide you that way. And that's fine. Therapy has its place. And I was realizing that therapy helped me talk about whatnot. And a lot of what I did in coaching wasn't necessarily on my trauma. It was setting goals that I never felt comfortable setting before because of my trauma. And that's what I started doing. I started setting these goals and getting out of my comfort zone, because I also realized I didn't have a comfort zone. That comfort zone was blown apart decades before, and this was starting to help me develop that comfort zone and being like, oh yeah, I could do that. I can set this goal. I'm going to go do this. And I just started doing it. I started knocking down walls, and I started achieving all these goals that we were setting in these sessions. And it's such a powerful tool for first responders, because most of us, if not all of us, are all go-getters, and we want to be successful in our jobs. We want to be the people to be looked up to. We want to be better leaders, and this coaching model can do that. It can help build better, more reliable, more resilient leaders in the first responder world. And it's because it's a proactive approach to the lifestyle we live every day. Mm-hmm. Instead of waiting until crisis happens, we go at it before it happens.
And so you mentioned that you did multiple things through your journey, so it wasn't just one avenue. It was a variety. So there's not just one resource out there necessarily, but it can take multiple, and you can go
multiple times too.
Yeah,
multiple times, and that's one thing I think people need to understand is there's no shame in having to go at it again.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're continuing to fight, if you're continuing to get up and put one foot in front of the other, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter. I may need therapy again. I have a therapist now. I may need inpatient again, and that's okay, because I'm going to be more prepared for it. I'm going to get more out of it at this point in my life.
That's right.
And that's what people really need to hold on to, is it's okay.
Your growth never changes. I mean, your growth never stops. You're
Never
continuing
stops.
to grow all the
Always
time.
grow.
Yeah.
Always continue to grow.
That's a very encouraging point. Do you have like a story or an example of, because of all the work that you've put into your healing and your openness to continue your growth, something that you've gotten to experience that wouldn't have gone the positive way that it did had you not devoted yourself to that, to growing and healing and really addressing the trauma that had changed you?
I think the biggest accomplishment with all that is my ability to be there now for my wife. Mm-hmm. My wife is a ER nurse. She's also been an ICU nurse. She works in a very busy system, and with the pandemic, healthcare is upside down. They are very understaffed. They are very underappreciated and treated very poorly. And my wife has been recently diagnosed with PTSD. Some of it may be secondary PTSD because of what she had to go through with me. Mm-hmm. And years ago, I wouldn't have been a resource for her. I wouldn't have been, and not because I'd be selfish, but because I wouldn't be able to deal with, someone that close to me's trauma. I wouldn't be able to deal with someone else that close to me suffering, and I hold on to that every day because in recent times my wife's been able to look at me and be like, "Thank you. You're the reason I'm able to go to work right now. You are a more supportive husband than you have been in our." You can edit this.
Yeah, you better be quick on that one.
Wow.
Carry the two.
2018 we got married. No, 14.
14. Oh, goodness.
Wow. Pressure. So, I mean, my wife been married since 2014. We've been together since 2011. So we've been together 11 years, and she's, telling me you're the most supportive you've ever been. And that means a lot to me, because that to me is a sign that I have changed. And not necessarily changed, it's who I am, right, but changed my personality. And this is who Keith is. And my wife sees it and is able to benefit from it.
Yeah, you've been able to uncover that part of you that you didn't know was there. Yeah.
Right, and it's always been there. It's who I am.
Right.
And for years I thought it was something else, and now I know who I am.
Yeah. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So what I want to ask you is that I know for my mental health issues, I was, even though I didn't really know at the time when I was going through my 14 years of law enforcement what I was dealing with, I obviously knew I had changed, and I was trying to tried to make ways better that I could perform at work as opposed to focusing on a way I could perform at home. I was more focused on trying to keep my job and showing up to my job to function than I was trying to function at home for my kids and for my wife. And I feel like a lot of times first responders, because our identity is so wrapped into our badge or into our uniform, that when that is taken away, we feel like we've lost our purpose. And we honestly feel like we have no other purpose to be here on life. And I know that's what I went through, and that's why I didn't want to live, because I feel like law enforcement was my purpose. And I felt like when it was gone and taken away from me, that my whole life was stripped away. But really looking back, as a first responder, I should have been focusing more on staying healthy for my family and not worried about so much about getting promotions, worried about trying to stay healthy so I could, become a detective or all that stuff, and focus more on my family and on my kids. Because even though I had 3 kids, and I know you have kids too, I know I had 3 kids, and even being a father, I didn't feel worthy to even be their dad.
Right.
I didn't feel worthy to be a friend. I didn't feel worthy to be a husband. PTSD can really, and mental health issues can chain you. It can like strap you down in chains to your house. And to get those chains unlocked, number one, it starts inside of you. I know people would always try to tell me I need help, but until I truly wanted help for myself, I started to unlock those chains. And unfortunately, that first one, it does have to be you that unlocks it.
Absolutely.
For me, it was realizing that my purpose was not in my badge. For me, I got saved, and God came into my life, and everybody, has their own spiritual relationship. But for me, it was God, and it showed me that my purpose was not in my badge. And my purpose is for actually what we're doing right now and how we're helping first responders. And it's my family and my kids, and it's impacting the generations of first responders that are coming up behind us to help change this generational curse, I want to call it, that's happening with first responders. So unlocking that first key for me was really tough. But once I did, it was reaching out to her and having the support at home, someone to talk to, and she was safe. And then made me start to unlock some other locks that were holding me down and chains that were holding me down. What were some of yours, and how did you what was your first lock, and how did you continue that journey to get yourself from being chained down? Because it does feel like you're chained down, and you're afraid to even go out in public sometimes.
And you bring up a good point too with purpose, and the identity is so engraved in our heads as first responders that we are firefighter this, police this, whatever it is, all the time. And then you meet people who are bankers or real estate or even doctors, nurses, and like, no, once I'm out, I'm out. I'm not that person. I'm this. I enjoy hiking. I knit, whatever. I do puzzles, whatever it might be. And you realize, looking back on it, that, wow, I was the weird one. And, for me, I think the first real hard lock was trust. Even with my wife, I had to unlock that massive padlock, and it was hard because I trust my wife. I trust. That's why I married my wife. I trust her, but my emotions, I didn't trust my wife with my emotions. And so when I really wanted to get help, and I knew I really needed to get help, and I really wanted to heal and move past this, that was the first padlock I had to get off. Is I had to be able to look at my wife when it was appropriate and be like, I am not in a good spot. And I had to be comfortable telling her that, and because she was my rock, she was the person that I needed to go to for that. And that was the first heavy chain to drop off me, was being able to trust who I told, whether it be my wife or at the time my therapist, the truth, and to be honest, not just with them, but be honest with myself, because that's how we stay safe. Is when you tell yourself, I'm not safe.
And that's what it was for me. I feel like I couldn't heal what I couldn't reveal.
Yep.
And it was literally me being honest with her and explaining to her what I was dealing with the PTSD, and before we even got married, what I was struggling with my alcoholism, and when I got addicted to pain pills from dealing with all my mental health stuff. Just being able to look her in the eye and tell her, and she was the first person I really told a lot of the hurt and pain inside of me, and how she responded was huge. And that's why I think it does take a full family approach, because had she had just shut me down or told me to, hey, leave that crap at work, don't bring it home with you, that just would have perpetuated the problem. So I just think the first lock, it starts with us, and the second one is our family members and who we talk to and reach out to. And if you're a family member at home and someone's reaching out to you, know that you may be their one and only person they ever reach out to. So do take time and do listen to what they got to say, because we do feel held down, and you guys can help us get through that. I know she was that for me.
No, and we do have resources available that can help family members as well. So it's not just for the first responders, but feel free as family members to look through the resources as well, or reach out to us if you're looking for anything specific to help you support the first responder in your life too. We're happy to do so. And with that, if you had to have had someone or give advice to family members as to how to reach out to somebody that's struggling, what might that be? What would you have needed in that moment for somebody to?
So for me, the biggest discovery was that I had to feel comfortable. I had to, like Daniel said, you can't force someone to get better. You can't force someone to get help. It's like trying to get an alcoholic dry. It ain't gonna happen if they don't want it. And the biggest step was having that comfortability, that safe space, if you will, at home. And it wasn't so much of a specific resource. It was more of knowing that if I say this, I'm not going to be shamed. I'm not going to feel like, oh, well, if we do that, I'm going to have to get childcare, or you're going to be out of work and finances, because that increases the burden, that increases the guilt, that increases the shame. So it's more of just having that support system. Support can do more than therapy can do. And that's really what, and not just the first one, but the spouses and the family need is that support. And we're all in this together, and we really need to support one another through this in order to all heal and just be healthier.
And so we'll wrap it up with this. So for the people watching at home that may not have the courage to come to something like this, if you could just tell them, if they were a young first responder, or maybe they've been doing it for 20 years and they're laying in bed right now, they got their bottle of alcohol like I used to do, and they're sobbing and they're not sure how they're going to even live another day, like what's something you can tell them to just let them know that they're not alone, or maybe something you just want to tell them to encourage them, to let them know that life isn't over and that their purpose isn't over?
I think the biggest thing is that everything you're feeling is completely normal. Everything. You're a human being. As first responders, we tend to lose, touch with the fact that we are just as fragile as the people we're trying to help and save, and we are emotional creatures. And the fact that the job is affecting you is normal. We do an abnormal job, and it causes us to feel everything that is normal. And there's a reason why only 1.5% to 2% of the population can do what we do. And that should encourage you that what you're doing and what you're feeling is right, and that it's okay to get help. There is no shame in that.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
No
thank
problem.
you for being here and just
absolutely.
being open and honest. And I know there'll be more videos down the road we'll want to talk to you about, but thank you for
man.
sitting down and doing our first one. And
Absolutely.
I appreciate you, man. Like I said, you're a trailblazer. I truly believe in what you're doing, and you encourage me. And
I appreciate the feedback. It's you said it earlier. It's tough because you do. Sometimes you sit there, and I've had it. My wife gets upset when I do it, but I'll be like, "That's it. I'm done. And I'll go in hibernation mode with Facebook for like a week, and I'll be like, why am I doing this? And nobody's listening. Nobody cares. Look at this guy over here. And my wife will be like, all right, step away.
Right.
Deep breath. You can't fix the world in one day.
yep.
Right.
And it's hard. It's hard because we're instant gratification people. I'm just, whether I was a first responder or not, I would have been an instant gratification person. And I want people to get better. I don't want people to have to go through what I did. Not just the traumas from the job, but the length of time it took me to heal was awful. And I do want to see the world get better quicker. And it's not. I mean, the world's awful right now.
Yes.
Right.
And it's awful for first responders even more. And so I do. I have those moments, man, where I wake up and I'm like, today's the day. I'm going to shut down Facebook and I'm going to walk away. I'm going to tell this person I'm not going to be here for this meeting and blah, blah, blah. But you got to do it. You got to do it because at the end of the day, I love what I do.
And thank you for saying yes to this calling, because it is a calling. This is a calling that you're doing, and you're changing lives, you're impacting life, and you're helping save first responders from suicide and other mental health issues. So seriously, thank you for being a trailblazer, and
Everyone deserves to live.
that's it. You have a heart of gold, man, and it shows, and I'm glad you're out here. I know it's not easy, and I'm glad you're out here doing it.
It's not as hard as the job was, though.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you.
But I truly believe, and Michael Segura and some of those other guys, I truly believe there is a large network of people throughout this country that is growing right now, and we all are working together. We know that we can do more united than divided.
Absolutely.
And we are all communicating with each other. We all truly are on one path to just try to help first responders that are struggling. That's it. We're not competitors. We're working together.
Same goal.
Same goal. So thanks, guys, and we'll have more videos coming out soon.